I guess before we get going, do you want to stay as Professor X with this?
Who the hell is Professor X?
That's what Colin was calling you whenever we were like, we don't know if he wants to be.
Well, we can just clarify that and just, appreciate the concern there. But
yeah,
what we do is out in the open, and I'm not trying to hide it.
It's kind of what I figured, but I wanted to have your permission with it before I went with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, Augie, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, pleasure.
So Ibogaine has always fascinated me because it's the one, it's the one I've been most scared of because of the cardio properties of it. Hearing that, I guess before we even go with it, what's your background? What got you into plant medicines? And then what experience did you have with plant medicines before working as a facilitator with Ibogaine?
Okay, so I wasn't a facilitator with Ibogaine.
Okay.
Right. My initial experience was to experience it with a SEAL brother. I think at the time he was still active and going to be retiring within a couple of months, who had multiple brain injuries and PTSD. And we had crossed paths at the Brain Treatment Center at Mission Viejo Hospital like a little over a year before.
Okay.
And that's how we connected. So what brought me to there? Well, I had a couple of brain injuries, experienced PTSD, went through many years of trying to figure out what it was and how to make things better and so forth. And that involved a lot of years where I just gave myself over to the VA. I was like, okay, finally, I can't figure it out. Nothing's getting better. Tell me what to do. Mm-hmm. Well, that led to 13 different medications, and just things got worse and worse. And I eventually titrated off of most of them. And then I had another brother tell me about a brain treatment center in Newport Beach where he had a breakthrough. Right? I'm like, okay, I'm going to go up there. Okay. Drove up there, met the founder, Yin Li, who's a medical doctor from China, but also an electrical engineer, which is really interesting. And he let me sit in a presentation that he was providing to a bunch of doctors and PhDs about the technology behind it, which is transcranial magnetic stimulation that is personalized, so that rather than just using the FDA-approved protocol, which is left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex 10.2 hertz for major depression that has been resistant to medications, they take a quantitative EEG of brain activity and use that as a means of targeting where the 1.5 Tesla coil will be placed and to determine the frequency of stimulations, the electromagnetic stimulation, which induces the firing of neural activity. Right? I did that, and as I got home after the first treatment, I started to dream again. I hadn't dreamt in a dozen years. Right? Huh. And I actually became lucid and jumped up in bed in the middle of the night. Oh my God, I've been dreaming, And my sleep had been like 2 to 3 hours a night for a decade. It was horrible. And I'd been given medications to put me to sleep and medications to wake me up. And so I was never really asleep or never really awake. And it was just really horrible. And I continued on that treatment and found it to be very useful for me. Very small company, they didn't have any training. So I volunteered and I developed the training for the technicians. You could ask 4 people in the company the same question and get 4 different answers. So that needed to be dealt with. And then we opened a clinic at Mission Viejo Hospital, and it was there for about a year. And then they wanted to expand and open a clinic in San Diego, so they asked me to open a clinic in San Diego as the clinical director, and I did that. And I think it was about 9-10 months after I'd done that where this guy came back and said, hey, somebody said I could go down to Mexico. What do you think? And prior to that, every morning at the clinic, I would study research on anything having to do with PTSD and TBI, and I came across a lot of research about psychedelics. This is just clearly something's going on here. Right. But I had a real negative impression that kind of tied back to college, where a Green Beret brother who'd just come back from Vietnam put LSD in my beer at a concert. And it was a horrible experience. And ever since I thought, you got to be a moron to take psychedelics. Why would anybody want to do that?
So that was your only prior psychedelic experience? Okay.
Yeah. Well, I did take mushrooms once, a small dose of mushrooms that wasn't bad, but still, I just had this impression that it was really dangerous.
Right.
But I hadn't really looked under the hood and explored further. So I began to read everything I could, and then I began to search for people who were facilitating, and I came across, some guy, T-shirt says Shaman Sean. Oh, okay, that turns out to be a bit of a clusterfuck. And I just ran into a lot of people who, it was like the Wild West, and they're selling snake oil and stuff. And but I did keep going and asking questions, and people in the medical field, and was directed to people who were supposedly the best in their field in California and so forth. And that was very helpful. And so when this guy reached out to me, I said, I'm interested. Let me talk to the doctor involved. And so I actually went up and met him in San Francisco, and he's a Mexican doctor. And then I joined in, and I had the experience with him. And it was an Ibogaine on a Friday night. First, you get an EKG in Tijuana, and then Ibogaine Friday night, and then the Sunday morning is a toad venom experience, 5-MeO DMT. And then I supported the organization, which at the time was called Mission Within. It's kind of spun off by itself, and then vets came from that. So it was this doctor and Marcus and Amber Capone, and I supported the weekend retreats for about a year in 2018 and 19, a little less than a year, and had 2 experiences myself, and then witnessed a whole bunch of experiences from all the other guys. Could be anywhere from 3 to 5 people in a weekend, and learned a lot from it.
So, this podcast is the Trip Report. So let's talk about that first Ibogaine experience that you had.
Yeah. So I had read that Ibogaine had potential cardiotoxic effects, and I started looking into what that was about, and that it changes the way calcium moves through cells, right? And I also had heard about how it had been so effective for people who had been addicted to opiates or heroin, or could be almost anything, and they could very quickly come out of that without the withdrawal effects and so forth. That was really super interesting to me, and I had planned on going to medical school way back, and took prerequisites. I just never had the patience to do anything for very long. So that's tied into the brain injury, I think. And but I started just reading everything I could about neuroscience and the brain. And one thing that was really interesting to me is that astrocytes, which are these white matter cells that act as kind of conductors for 3-dimensional domains of neurons, they track all of the activity of neurons, right? Inputs, outputs, and the timing of everything. And they communicate with each other via calcium wave signaling throughout the cortex. I thought, whoa, that could be why it's so beneficial for a brain that's been knocked out of whack. Because ultimately, from what I have seen and read, its brain function is really tied to timing of communication. A neuron requires 20 to 50 inputs from adjacent neurons within a 50 millisecond window in order, right, to activate an action potential and send the information along, to pass it along. And so if the timing of surrounding networks and neurons is off, then there's this constant banging on the door, and you don't get enough of them within that window in order to trigger, and then you've got brain fog and all kinds of problems. And we had seen that at Brain Treatment Center. We take quantitative EEGs, and you can see this disparity of the firing rate of neural networks can be as low as like 5 or 6 hertz in the frontal cortex and 30 in the posterior brain, and that really causes a lot of problems. And so that was really interesting to me to experience what it was about and to explore it. And so I said yes. I was not still suffering a lot of negative symptoms, but I did want to take the opportunity to explore. So we went in and we got dosed on that Friday night. Well, prior to dosing, they had at that time some Mexican doctors, or actually interns from a local hospital, that would come in and they'd hook you up to IV and so forth. And that experience was very negative. It took 45 minutes. It was like, I couldn't imagine anybody doing a worse job. So that, okay, kind of shady.
So they just weren't hitting the vein then?
No, they were very bad at what they were doing. But it was a beautiful site, and Airbnb right on the beach, beautiful home and everything. And the support staff was wonderful. It's just the medical professionals involved, I thought, were really substandard. And so I got dosed and laying in bed.
So is the dose capsules, or is it given through the IV?
Capsules.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was in the IV itself?
They just had a port, so if they needed to juice you up with something, if you were having some cardiac effects, or if they needed to give you some saline solution or something, they could, right? And then you're hooked up to an EKG, and so they can monitor and see what's going on. And then they give you eye shades and music starts, and I don't recall exactly how long it was for it to start to unfold, but it's probably somewhere in the area of 45 minutes to an hour. And interesting in that visuals come that are kind of gray, brownish, kind of not a lot of colors or interesting things that you might experience with some of the other psychedelic experiences. And I was told that, yeah, you're just going to see a video of the events of your life, you know, and it's going to unfold. I'm like, well, okay. There was a lot of activity, but it was all fractured. There was no specific events that I could make sense of, or there would be partial faces would come through and so forth. And then I'd have some experiences I would see I couldn't really make sense of. I couldn't recall them actually being life events or anything. And this went on.
Still in the brownish tones?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and this went on for about 8 hours. During the course of that, had to go to the bathroom, got up, you know, had someone help me in because it was very wobbly, and back. And periodically I'd get the sense that somebody had entered the room. I'd open, take the shades up to check. No, you know, it was just exploration for me.
With the shades up, were there any noticeable visual changes?
Not much, no.
Okay.
No, you could actually lay there in the bed and perceive with the eye shades on that there were people walking around, and then check, and then nobody's there. Or another time, perceive somebody standing by you, check, and then there's a doctor looking at your EKG or something, you know, and it's just the way it went. Mm-hmm. And then I had this really uncomfortable experience of seeing my son blow the front of his head off with a shotgun. I'm like, what the fuck is that? What am I supposed to learn from this? You know, I was like, whoa. And that was I guess the most dramatic experience from it. So other than that, not a lot of it really actually made sense to me.
What did you make of that? Seeing your son, I mean, was it like an age specific? Like, was it the age your son currently was?
Yeah, it was.
So looking back now, you know that years have passed, and you know your son, thank God, is still with us.
Yeah.
What do you make of witnessing that? Like, what do you think lesson there was to learn?
I had since I began work with at the Brain Treatment Center and really kind of engaging the community of veterans and military again. I'd been exposed to a lot of people that I have come to know, right, or had known in the past who had killed themselves, and for a lot of different reasons. And so I had been reading a lot about suicidal ideation and what drives it and the trauma involved. And I was aware that my son had been bullied quite a bit in grade school, something I was not aware of at the time because I just was constantly working. And so I had a lot of guilt about that, and I could see how it affected him and kind of contracted his life a bit. And although he, at the time, was well and thriving, perhaps just my fear that could occur. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. It never really made any sense. And then when I woke up, and then the therapist who was running the retreat came in and said, hey, can I ask you a question? So these things that we see happening, right, can they foreshadow events that actually will occur? She says, oh, yes. I'm like, oh, fuck, you know. Well, and she had described herself as a therapist, and I found that she wasn't. There's a lot of people who say that they're therapists, and they're guides they went to a school to understand how to guide, or facilitators or whatever, but the word therapist, I think, is thrown around quite more often than it should be. And then I felt fine, and I went out like 8 o'clock in the morning, and there's a bunch of fruit, had some fruit, and felt, fresh, that kind of like a fresh shower. You've cleaned off every part of your being, so to speak, and then went out on the beach and went for a run, and jumped in the ocean, and then I started hearing somebody yelling and screaming at me. It was one of the guys who was helping out who had been through previously. And I came in, and he's like, what the hell are you doing? You're supposed to be resting. I'm like, hey, I feel fine, And so it can be apparently really difficult for people. Really tough ride. That wasn't my experience.
Well, it sounds like your headspace going in was already pretty good.
It was, yeah. And one of the other guys that went through, his experience was everybody was like a cartoon character, and so for him the whole thing was just this long cartoon.
Yeah.
And for the other guy, it was really dark, right? And involved a lot of his dark experiences, both combat, but also back in childhood, and which I come to understand is super common, and that most of the people that we have served that are veterans, they had significant childhood trauma that drove them in the direction of entering the military in the first place, in order to seek safety and strength and find a tribe and so forth. So we had a variety of experiences there, and the other two guys were not comfortable getting out and going anywhere until the end of the day, on Saturday, and that I found was interesting. And then the next day we then had the toad experience Sunday morning, and so that was my first Ibogaine experience.
So start to finish, about how long was that experience?
Probably 8 for me.
Okay.
8, 9.
Yeah, because I've heard people say up to like 24 hours.
Yeah. Some people, it's a really long ride for them. We all take up these molecules at different rates. We metabolize them at different rates, and it's Ibogaine and Iboga both. There's a pretty wide range of experiences. One of the guys that was there that week, and a support member, also a former team guy, had done Iboga, and that for him was a 36-hour ride.
Yeah.
Right. And his Ibogaine ride was about 12 hours.
Okay.
And probably on average, maybe 10, 12 hours.
Gotcha.
And for the people, and I don't know how many people there were, like 60, 80, I don't know, after that, whose trips I supported, they tended to range between 12 and as long as 18.
Okay. Yeah. So nothing too crazy on round 1, but then you had the experience to go round 2 with 100 micrograms of LSD.
Yeah, and that one, somebody didn't arrive at the airport, so there was extra bed all set up, and all the resources were there and available. And I had given the Mexican doctor some pretty strong negative feedback about some of his behaviors. Mm-hmm. And the way he was doing things, and he's like, well, I want to take this spot, keep me out of his hair.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I guess so. Yeah. And he's like, and we can add 100 mics of LSD. A lot of people up in the Bay Area are trying. They like it. And I'm like, Being someone's good, more, better kind of guy for most of my life, I thought, yeah, okay.
So had you had, other than that, being dosed in the beer in college, had you had an LSD experience prior to this combination with the Ibogaine?
No.
Okay. Interesting.
No, I had experienced psilocybin, the toad venom, ketamine, MDMA, but not LSD.
Okay.
And the way I had gone about, so I guess actually that was part of the reason that I took the first experience, is I feel that I need to experience something and understand it well before I can recommend it to anybody else.
I'm in the same boat. I feel that 100%.
Yeah, and so people are asking me about it. I'm like, I don't know, but I'm going to find out.
Yeah.
And so I, jumped on board, and then he suggested that this might be, more beneficial than Ibogaine by itself. And I'm like, well, I'm an old guy, and this is my thing. I'm going to go ahead and just explore and test the waters and report back, And so that's what I did. So I said yes.
Yeah.
Laid down, got plugged in, took the meds, and music goes on, and it didn't take very long before it was clear that this was going to be a very different ride.
Yeah.
It was much more visual, but also vibrational, heavy vibrational. So that the experience began as if I was strapped on to the back of a 9-foot bumblebee that was flying around from one location to another, and each location had like a different scenario of different characters and even types of beings. There were horse people in one spot, and bees and bumblebees in another, and but it was I could just feel my entire body just like actually bouncing.
Yeah.
To the point of knowing I'm just broken out in a huge sweat.
Did anybody witnessing your experience say that you were shivering or shaking?
Oh, yeah.
Or anything?
An actual therapist was there who I came to know and appreciate. And she says, "Oh, yeah, you were flopping around like a fish."
Sorry, I'm trying to get them quick banging doors out there.
Yeah, I can't believe you're texting during a podcast interview.
Rookie.
God, your generation. Oh, my God.
Sorry, I just didn't want to keep getting banging going on there.
I didn't hear any banging. I doubt any of these listeners heard any banging, but they sure heard that text.
Okay, so you're bouncing through different dimensions. Any interaction with the entities of any sort, or just kind of an observer?
Observer with very, mild interaction. Kind of like, who are you? What are you doing here?
Yeah.
I'm just going along for the ride.
But I mean, super vivid, like you can make out every detail.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it was, and I like to ask this question: what do you have to teach me? What do I have to learn here? No idea. Nothing came.
Yeah.
Just a wild ass ride all over the dang, this and many other dimensions apparently. And it finally ended. I'm just like, oh God, thank God, And the therapist came over and gave me some water, and I was totally drenched. The bed was totally drenched. And I'm looking around and thinking, did you guys give me a bag? Because I probably needed one. They should have given me. I was severely dehydrated.
Yeah.
Afterwards, and again, just another example of the medical support that was present that was really insufficient, and that might have been the last, if not second to last time I supported a weekend, because it just more ridiculous things happened. Some people would be re-traumatized.
Yeah.
The Ibogaine itself was very helpful for many people, but also there were some people that are harmed.
Yeah.
You never hear about that.
Right.
One guy I picked up, and he didn't tell me until after the weekend that he'd downed a bottle of tequila the night before he arrived, but he stopped drinking.
Yeah.
And he led a really changed and significant life where he really helped a lot of people for the next maybe 5 years or so, and he died of a heart attack fairly recently. But really, everybody loved the guy. He was really a wonderful dude. And so for him, life-changing and saving, and had an impact on many others. But then there's another who became a close friend, who was a patient at the Brain Treatment Center, who had left the teams and gone to work doing contract work for an agency where the deployment cycle was 3 months on, 3 months off, and going into the worst places constantly. And then he had an experience where, cut some of the details out, where he was on the job and he called home for the death of a family member, and while he went home, then his principal and his team were all murdered. And everything just went, really downhill. And so he had some improvement from the personalized TMS at the Brain Treatment Center in San Diego. Wasn't enough. So I said, well, you want to check into this? Only if you go with me. All right. So, it turned out he was purging for 12, 16 hours. Came out of it severely dehydrated. Got on the plane, went home, and he just said the next 6 months were the worst 6 months of his life. So what's that all about? Yeah. I don't know. There are some people that, everybody's different. Individual differences always apply, and being real careful about that is very important. It's something that, I learned a lot from that experience, supporting that organization. I learned a lot about what not to do.
Yeah.
And then, continued to seek ways to improve outcomes and also mitigate risks and ensure that nobody gets re-traumatized or harmed.
The LSD combination experience, what was the length of duration of that?
I think that was also about 8 hours, or it might have been a little bit less.
Okay.
I think it might have been maybe just an hour or so less than before. I remember thinking, well, that was shorter, but much more violent,
And since then, you've done just LSD by itself?
I have, yeah, and it was beautiful.
How would you compare the two, the combination versus just LSD?
Oh, LSD by itself, the next time I did it was in Day of the Dead down in Mexico, down near Cabo and El Pescadero, and it was lovely. It was just a beautiful experience.
So just drastically different visuals, like the Ibogaine.
Yeah, it was also vibrational in that my body did vibrate quite a lot. But being naked in bed with a woman, that's not such a bad thing.
True.
Yeah. And no, but there was a lot of perspiration and so forth, but it was a joyous, lovely ride as compared to this other one, which was,
bizarre.
Duct taped to the back of a 9-foot bumblebee.
I mean, did you find that fascinating, scary?
Not scary, because I knew that there was going to be an end to it, right? And I was very interested in everything that was going on, but it was harsh, right? And so I was just like, okay, just riding it out.
Yeah.
Right? And trying to appreciate all these characters and these stories, and like there's these, these humanoids with heads, horse heads on them, like kings and queens, and it was really, really interesting.
I've said it time and time again. Like, I think the things you see in that other realm, whatever that realm is so much more interesting than any movie or TV show that you can watch in this world.
I was like, am I living inside of a chess game here? What is this? It was a very interesting experience. It's not one that I would repeat or recommend to anyone. I mean, it's definitely like, no, I don't think that there can be any potential benefit. And it was so harsh that my nervous system really felt like I was sunburned on the inside for the next 3 weeks.
Interesting.
Just, everything was fried. Just like, you get bad sunburn, the sheet,
stiff,
it's like, or the shirt or anything, just like,
Yeah.
It was like that for 3 weeks. I thought, well, what have I done,
So, your time being there, did you witness any cardio events with anybody that had gone through the treatment?
No.
Okay.
No, but it does. I mean, one does need to be cautious, because if it does, as we suggest, change the way that calcium moves through cells, then that could potentially be very beneficial in terms of kind of forcing a reset of the timing of all of the astrocytes, which really manage and control and orchestrate the firing rates of neurons, networks of neurons. That could be super beneficial, right? And that might be what contributes to this kind of reset that occurs, where because there's a change suddenly in the signaling of all, the calcium wave signaling of all these astrocytes, it might be like a computer getting knocked around and then automatically forcing a reboot. Something of that sort.
Yeah.
And it made sense to me that it could be beneficial. And I have seen a lot of benefits of Ibogaine for people who have addictions, but also people who have experienced brain trauma.
Right.
What you see with brain trauma, the head gets impacted or blast overpressure or whatever. When there's injury to the brain, the area that is injured slows down, right, in order to allow for healing to occur. But most often it doesn't speed up again.
Right.
And so when you have a healthy brain, the entire cortex is firing at roughly the same frequency. Top of the bell curve is 10.2 hertz, posterior and frontal. Right? When you have someone exposed to high tension or high threat environment for a prolonged period of time, because the brain is constantly adapting to environment and experience, it shifts resources. So if you're in high threat, high tension, long period of time, posterior brain gets more resources. So it upregulates your capacity to monitor the environment. You grow a very large antenna, right? And what you hear and see and feel and the facial expressions, all the unconscious stuff as well. Am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? And so you wind up with these eight-lane superhighways in the posterior brain. But somebody gets shortchanged. Right? Brain has a fixed energy budget. Right? So if suddenly 80% is going to posterior brain, and that exist or continues for a prolonged period of time, and the prefrontal cortex, home of executive function, gets shortchanged. And you might wind up with these two-lane country roads, right? Where you're supposed to be able to make sense of all that information in the back. And as a result, you wind up with degradations in your capacity to pay attention and focus, concentrate, decision-making, emotional regulation. All these things kind of degrade. And there's this old Lucille Ball skit where the two women are packing chocolates that come down a conveyor belt, and they're doing fine until it speeds up, and then they're like shoving them in their mouth and in their bras and everything.
I've seen it, yeah.
And that, that's, I think, what happens with a lot of people, veterans, military, first responders, or just children of alcoholics or whatever, where you're in high tension or high threat for a prolonged period of time, and you get this massive amount of information coming in from your antenna, your large antenna, and you can't make sense of it. So that creates anxiety, it drives avoidance and self-medication in order to quiet the noise, and all that stuff happens. So, but if you can, and you can see it in an EEG, right? And that was part of the objective of the treatment that we provided at the Brain Treatment Center, was to kind of balance things out. And so usually it was much slower in the prefrontal cortex. And so that's where you would place the coil and stimulate it at a faster rate. And by doing so, that exercised, that provided a stimulus that your body would respond to, right? And the adaptive response was upregulating the capacity to provide fuel as well as remove waste product. The same thing happens if you're training a muscle. Mm-hmm. It just tends to happen a lot faster in the brain.
Yeah.
And that shift of resources then quiets down the posterior brain. And as that imbalance, right, begins to balance, then symptoms would fade away. Yeah. It's really incredible to see, to observe.
I mean, it was fascinating to look at my pre and post EEG results working with you in the research study, because it was visible.
You could see the change, right?
My treatment in the chair, what's that, 30 minutes tops?
Yeah.
And to see the haywire at the beginning and then just a smooth signal afterwards.
And that's what we were seeking by providing that personalized form of TMS, although it would take 6 to 8 weeks in order for that kind of regulation to occur, that balancing of activity to occur. And it would only happen in 1 out of 3 people.
Yeah.
Right. Which is why which is great, much better, and really helpful for that 1 out of 3 where they've tried everything else, including multiple medications, right, can be life-changing. But still, not good enough.
Right.
Plus, we were having some issues, safety issues that weren't being addressed by the company while they were trying to, sell the technology. And so that drove me to look under every stone and continue to find ways to improve outcomes, and that led me to the psychedelics. And that's what most psychedelics do, is they promote global synchronous firing. Mm-hmm. So for the period of time that you are under their influence, your brain is operating in a way that is very, very efficient, right? And that, again, that stimulus, that's firing up areas that have been too slow.
Right.
Right. That's waking up areas that have been depressed through emotional blunting, right, or a lack of creative expression and so forth. All these things, they get stimulated, and they start to do what they're supposed to do, and then all of a sudden one is like, "Whoa, I'm different." Right.
Yeah.
Of course, if you just go right back to the diet and lifestyle that brought you there in the first place, then those benefits are going to unwind, and so that's a large part. That's a huge opportunity. Is helping people become aware of what they can do in order to change patterns of thought and behavior. And that's also one of the problems I had with the way the doctor was running things down there. At the end of the weekend, guys would say, well, what am I supposed to do now? And what am I supposed to do if things get worse again? He says, well, just, go back to your life. But if things don't work out, we'll just come back in 6 months, which is a great business model.
Right.
But that doesn't promote success for the individual, right? And there wasn't anything really done during the experience to help people understand, what subconscious programmings have been running usually since childhood,
right,
that, that came into existence in order to promote survival, but don't serve you well anymore.
Yeah.
And the awareness of those things is huge, because when they begin to be activated, there's a pause and you can choose differently. You can, oh, wait, I recognize what that is. I know where it came from, but I also know where it's taken me, which is not good for me. And you can begin, to craft new patterns of behavior, new self-talk, beliefs, transform limiting beliefs, change behaviors of patterns of behavior. And it's remarkable what's possible, really. I mean, the Ibogaine itself, though, I think that it appears to me as though that it can be a tool that would be very beneficial for promoting kind of a reset of the firing rate of networks of neurons in the brain, which is good for a whole lot of different reasons. For addiction, it just has to be used very carefully, and the medical personnel, need to be people who are actually practiced at what they do. Mm-hmm. And there's the doctors. They're supposed to be watching the EKGs, but I would constantly catch them just on their cell phones in the corner, not doing anything, not paying any attention to what's going on.
Right? Super dangerous.
Yeah, and it just wasn't getting addressed. So eventually, and there were a few other things that made it very clear that the doctor was unethical and untrustworthy, lied to me on a couple of occasions, and put people's safety and freedom at risk as a result of his behavior. And so I split and began to search for ways to more safely provide and accurately dose the 5-MeO-DMT, because to me that did seem to be the most powerful tool.
Right.
But also, 1 in every 6 or 7 people that I saw administered the toad venom, the torch and the pipe, would have hellish experiences, and some of them felt pretty horrible afterwards, right? Felt worse off.
Yeah.
And then there were a couple of women that I know whom we did not serve, though, who experienced severe symptoms of PTSD after their toad experience. Both of whom had previously experienced sexual trauma, mm-hmm. and just began to look into it, and there's a much better way. And now that's what's being applied.
Yeah, the thing you hear always about Ibogaine, what's mostly in the media and everything, is talking about its ability for curing opiate addicts or addicts of any sort. Mm-hmm. You have since branched off and developed your own protocol, which is very successful with everybody I've seen that has gone through it. What have you worked with people with addictions, and what kind of rates of success have you seen with addiction specifically?
Yeah. So we've worked with a lot of people who have addiction issues, and we have had people who have stopped smoking the next day, stopped drinking the next day, reduce their abuse of alcohol or even cannabis, haven't felt the need mm-hmm. for the anxiety relieving effects of cannabis after the fact. A lot of that kind of activity, although I have to say that we have not served a heroin addict, and a lot of heroin addicts have been helped by Ibogaine. The other thing is that the 5-MeO-DMT itself also has very strong anti-addictive properties. And so I began to question whether was it really Ibogaine, or was it the 5-MeO, or was it a combination of the two that were driving those effects? Because the people that had the anti-addictive outcomes experienced exposure to both.
Yeah.
And the fact that one and both of them were occasionally harming people. So some of the people had a horrible Ibogaine, they'd say, fuck this, I'm not going to do the 5-MeO, and they'd split.
Yeah.
And some people would have an Ibogaine experience, which they felt good about, and then have a horrible 5-MeO experience, the toad venom experience. Mm-hmm. And then, fuck this, I'm never doing this again. And, you never hear from them again. And so I feel very, very good about the anti-addictive properties of 5-MeO-DMT.
Right.
Particularly when it happens to be stacked with MDMA, and there's a psycholytic process exploring a person's life and everything that has contributed to their addiction, for instance, and that awareness and the very balancing effects of the 5-MeO on the brain itself can wash that stuff away. It can facilitate very rapid change. So I'm still, I'm not certain really if Ibogaine is responsible for those outcomes more than 5-MeO, or if 5-MeO could do what Ibogaine has done with opioid addiction, because we've served people who have had challenges with opioids as well, who have gone completely off. So difficult to know, difficult to tell. But it does make sense to me that Ibogaine changing the way calcium moves through could have a positive impact on the calcium wave signaling of astrocytes in the brain, which could promote a kind of a reboot in terms of the timing of information flow.
Yeah.
Because it's all about timing. If you've got inefficient timing and you have a big difference in the frequency firing rate of neural networks, that's going to make it very difficult for them to pass information along to neighboring neurons and networks and for everything to make sense. Right? Yeah. But then again, you go to 5-MeO, which promotes this global synchronous firing at a higher frequency, gamma frequency, and that's where you get all these insights. Where you're just like, whoa, everything just makes sense. Yeah. Maybe that's the same kind of thing that's happening. So it's I've only had those 2 experiences, and my support of those treatments was less than a year. And I know a lot of people who have had very good experiences as a result. But also, we have wound up receiving a bunch of people who have had negative outcomes doing that treatment scenario in Mexico, right? and then wind up saying, "Oh my God, this is so much better." Why? It's just terribly interesting.
Yeah.
But one thing I can say is that we've not sent anybody over the edge and not sent anybody home having severe symptoms of PTSD. So nobody's not had any of the negative experiences I witnessed down in Mexico with a different approach, just a more careful approach.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, if it's not just the Ibogaine itself, right, but it's the facilitator. Right?
For sure.
So I would never recommend anybody go to that Mexican doctor.
Yeah.
And thankfully, Amber put a lot of effort into finding a better facilitator.
Yeah.
And she found somebody who had a clinic up in Canada with a great track record, and now he is running the program down in Mexico.
So VETS is completely disconnected from what Mission Within was.
The doctor, apart from being unethical, dishonorable, and untrustworthy, and everything, his behavior with them was very problematic, and it took a while to get disconnected from him.
Yeah.
But they did, thankfully, and they have somebody who I've had a conversation with, who I've referred people to.
Okay.
Right. That specifically were looking for Ibogaine and had addiction issues. I'm like,
gotcha.
Okay, go see this guy.
Yeah. And did you follow up? Do you know what the outcome was with VETS?
With VETS.
Was he sent to VETS with Amber component?
Well, he was sent to the clinic so they basically contract him.
Okay.
Right. And so he has a clinic, so he also serves other people.
Yeah.
And so VETS has a certain number, a month to go through.
Okay.
He has more capacity in that, so others come in that aren't being funneled by VETS.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And so far, you've seen good outcomes with...
Yeah, none of the kind of crap that happened with that Mexican doctor. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, like I said, thank you so much for sitting down with me and talking through this. Like I said, Ibogaine's been one that's fascinated me for a while, but realistically, that was the one I was most afraid of because of the cardio events. I didn't know how common they were, and I mean, that does give me some sense of ease knowing that you saw somebody who was rather unethical with the way that they treated the process.
Yeah, but you do go get an EKG beforehand that gets evaluated by a cardiologist, so there's specific signs that they can look for to determine, whether or not there is a risk and what kind of risk is involved. And so if there's a slight risk, and then age is an issue, then they might reduce the dose, for instance, which is also something else that I found problematic with that Mexican doctor, is that he seemed to be going about it in a way that really just was drove more business.
Yeah.
Right. So partial effects, just go back home, do what you've been doing, live the life the way you've been living it that brought you here in the first place, and then if the benefits don't stick for too long, just come back.
Come see us for another $6,000 or $10,000 or whatever it was.
Yeah. That was crazy to me, right? And so that there were some people whom I know who didn't have any issues on their EKG, but they were given low doses.
Yeah.
Right. And why? When there's another clinic in Mexico that's giving doses that are 3 times more than the dose he was giving, and they're having good results and no negative outcomes. And so it's really, all of these psychedelics have tremendous potential, but in whose hands, and how are they used?
Right.
And of course, the set and setting is incredibly important, and the settings there were great. They had really good, caring people who are, prepping food and just looking after the folks. But the people who are actually driving the facilitation and utilization of these molecules were just second rate, in my view.
Yeah. I think that covers everything.
All right.
Thank you so much for sitting in on this and everything you've done for me over the past year. I really do think that research study gave me something that I don't think anything else could have. I mean, those 3 days following and knowing what it feels like, what that EKG showed, that just complete sense of balance and reset. I had a buddy yesterday talking to me about anxiety and how everybody has some level of anxiety. And I was like, I don't.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to. And you can fix that. And you don't fix that with Xanax. That is not the way to do it.
A large part of that has to do, I believe, with the fact that you put in a lot of work beforehand, right?
Right.
And you really prepped yourself and taken yourself to a point where it didn't really take much to put you over the top and clean the slate, and optimize brain function.
Yeah.
And that's what your experience was. And I think it's appropriate, too, to say, you've talked about that study and so forth, is that my background with the EEGs at the Brain Treatment Center I really wanted to see what was happening in brains, right? And so we partnered with a precision neuropsychiatry company that could analyze the EEG data and captured pre and post on over 60 people, and the findings were what I expected. One was a surprise though. So 10 standard deviation increase in gamma frequency brain firing rate is super beneficial for many different things, right? Including just activating the lymphatic system to clear brain waste, which contributes, if you don't do it, contributes to Alzheimer's, dementia, and brain fog. And then the other is, and then also that global synchronous firing, right? Balancing out the activity, you get a decrease in anxiety and brain fog, an increase in just general awareness, and all of your executive functions pump up a little bit. Right?
Yeah.
But one thing that we would hope for and get in 1 out of 3 patients after 6 to 8 weeks of personalized TMS was an increase in peak alpha of 1 hertz. And peak alpha is a biomarker of cognitive horsepower, which affects a very wide range of functional capabilities. And reading comprehension, just all over the map. Right? So 6 to 8 weeks of treatment, once a day, 5 days a week. That's a very long time, very expensive. You get 1 hertz increase. And we also captured not just 5-MeO exposure alone, but our full day, what we feel like is our most powerful tool, is a full day journey that starts with MDMA, and you've got cyclitic process for, could be 2.5, 3.5, 4 hours. Kind of just looking back at all the events that contributed to a person's self-concept, right? And then layer on the 5-MeO, and that has gone anywhere from 2 to like 5 hours, depending upon the individual, because they have agency. They can step up slowly and carefully themselves. Where after lifting up all of these things that they've experienced in life, it's all on the table, and then suddenly they've got this super efficient brain that's operating better than it ever has. And insights just comes like, oh, of course, that's why this. Well, that's what that's about, right? And just have this opportunity to just really rewire to process and integrate in real time in that environment. And we found with that we got a 1.25 hertz increase in peak alpha in 1 day.
Yeah.
More than 6 to 8 weeks of TMS treatment. It's like, holy shit. I mean, we knew that the effects were profound. Right, and very, very powerful. But it was pretty amazing to see that.
Powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. I think we'll call it at that. I mean, one of the toughest things about leaving San Diego is going to be, saying goodbye to all the family that I've made here. Yeah. And I'm going to miss you guys. And I very much look forward to seeing you guys in the Caribbean. And
you get to make new family down there.
There you go.
And then, of course, invite current family.
We'll get you guys there.
Yeah.
All right.
I've not been to St. Thomas, but one of my old platoon mates is down there, so I look forward to visiting.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, man. And until next time.
All right.
Love you, brother.
Bravo. Good work, bro. Enjoy.